Well, welcome back, everyone, to this edition of Leading Through Unprecedented Times. I'm Tom Murray, your host, and I am fired up for the very last episode of this season. And I think there is no more fitting way than the two folks I'm about to bring to you for this episode. First, we have my good friend who's been on the podcast before, one and only Eric Sheninger, and we also have his co-author. We'll jump into that at the very end, and Nicki Slaugh. Nicki, I am so excited to be able to connect with you, and you are the principal at Quest Academy in Utah. I'm excited to hear your story there as well. So, Nicki, I'm going to have you go first. Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay. Hey, I'm Nicki Slaugh. This is my 23rd year in education. I started off in elementary. I loved teaching kindergarten, first, second, and third grades. Then I moved into a coaching role for about 4 years. And for the past 8 years, I've been a secondary administrator and I absolutely love my job.
Absolutely. And it's been an honor to follow you on social media and see the work. Part of the reason we reached out to ask if you'd be on the podcast, see the work that's happening. And I know you've been working really closely with Eric Sheninger. And for those of us on the podcast that may not be familiar with Eric's work, Eric, quick introduction, if you would.
My name's Eric, former science teacher and high school principal from New Jersey, where we were personalizing learning 15 years ago and improving achievement. Through the work of my amazing staff, because, it's the teachers that actually go in and do the work. We got a lot of notoriety, and then I left the principalship, and now through my consultancy, Aspire Change EDU, I support school systems all over the world with any aspect that improves teaching, learning, and leadership.
And I think it's a perfect segue into why I asked both of you to be on this podcast as we wrap up, is this notion of personalization, just creating more relevant experiences for kids so that they look forward to going to school, that they're not constantly asking, why are we learning this? And we learn to meet kids where they are. And so, Nicki, I have fallen in love with what I've seen online of just the highlights of what happens in your building. And what I want to ask is, if I were to walk into your building, or one of our listeners were to walk into your building, what would they see? What are the kids doing? What do you see in classrooms? And the reason I want to start with that question is I think it's a bit different than what I see in many other places that I get to visit. And so tell us a little about your school. And when somebody walks in, they look around, they walk down the hall, what might they see?
Well, culture is really important to me. And so how we welcome our students in each day kind of sets the tone or the vibe, right? So we always have music playing and my student council and cheer outside singing and dancing, making sure they greet everyone. And then all of my teachers through passing periods are always at the door doing the same thing, asking the kiddos how they are, just getting to know them. And then of course I love to dance. So I'm always putting music on in the halls just to help them feel relaxed and just because dancing's good with the soul.
Nicki, I saw a clip on that, I have to say, of you jumping up and down with your kids. And the first thing I noticed and thought about was, I am not coordinated enough to do what I saw you doing walking down that hallway. But in all seriousness, what I saw was kids happy, kids excited, kids wanting to be there, kids literally getting ready to run to class. And so kudos for setting that kind of environment. When I walk into a classroom, what might I see? What does it look like?
Okay, so it just depends on which subject you go in. We take multiple different personalization routes because obviously, as everyone knows, there's not just one way, right? So I do give my teachers voice and choice in how they actually personalize and meet the needs of all learners in the classroom. If you peek in a math classroom, you will not be able to find a math teacher. They will be working one-on-one or be pulling small group based off their previous formative assessments or their exit tickets. They use data to drive the decision in who they work with and target to meet their needs. The cool thing about this is there is not a teacher in front of the room talking at the kids. It's all student centered. It's like a flipped classroom approach where they're watching a teacher on the video. They can pause it, rewind it, watch it as many times as they want. They have multiple chances to prove understanding throughout each standard to where if they already know a concept, we do not expect them to stay with the rest of the class and do the same thing that everyone else is doing, right? So kids are moving at their own pace. Rather, that means an 8th grader in an actual 10th grade math class, or if it means a 6th grader maybe getting an additional support to fine tune some things they missed in 5th grade. So we have the self-pacing aspect as one of the ways that we personalize.
That's awesome. And I'm going to follow up with some instructional strategy questions later because I'm sure folks are interested in like, well, what does that look like? How do we make this personal? I want to jump back to something that you said. I'm going to go over to Eric here in a minute. And one of the very first things that you said in your response was about culture. Now, let's be real. What you're talking about does not happen in a culture of fear. It does not happen in a culture where people don't want to be. It doesn't happen in a culture that's not learner centered. And in the phrase that you referenced there. So, Eric, I want to go over to you. You get to see a lot. You have a very global perspective. You're constantly flying around the world to have these conversations. Talk to us, Eric, about culture. And then, Nicki, I'm going to come back to you with that question as well. But, Eric, talk to us about the importance of setting that culture for these changes to be able to happen.
Yeah, I think when we look at culture, it's going to be obviously impacted by sociodemographics, other types of resources. But when we really get into our schools, there are four key elements that not only that I emphasize, but also ones that Nicki believes in. And, first and foremost is that, creating conditions where people will take risks. You said before, Tom, fear. Zig Ziglar said, fear, forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. If people are afraid to take risks, if they're too comfortable, they, in The Greatest Showman, one of my favorite movies, don't laugh, Hugh Jackman says, comfort is the enemy of progress. So a culture that leads to personalization, taking risks. Also collaboration. Success is not one person. It's not one school. The ability to empower people to collaborate. One thing that we try to dispel is, everyone looks to get people to buy in. We shouldn't have to sell better ways to do things. How do we get people to embrace change because they see the value? In order to do that, there has to be a sense of collaboration. Number 3, feedback. Feedback is so important. Research has shown feedback that is timely, practical, and specific will help people grow their practice. And finally, something, Tom, that we talked about extensively in Learning Transformed, the research behind professional learning. Not one and done, not drive-by PD, but professional learning that is ongoing, that is job embedded, that is connected to evidence, research, that is data enhanced. So those 4 elements are critical to developing a culture primed for meaningful change.
Yeah, I love that, Eric, and I always appreciate your evidence driven mindset and conversation there and research base in which you pull those things from. Totally agree. So, Nicki, and the things that he was talking about related to culture, the clips that I saw online just give me an outside view. But what recommendations do you have for school or district leaders? We're at this time heading toward the summer. People are making changes. There are new principals. Maybe there's a new superintendent coming in. We recognize culture doesn't happen overnight. It also doesn't happen just by chance. We've got to be intentional about it. And so, Nicki, how can leaders be intentional about creating an environment with the type of experiences you're talking about can thrive?
Well, you want it comfortable for your staff so that they feel comfortable asking questions and sharing ideas. They want to feel valued as a professional, right? And so once we start doing that, then I develop a relationship with them, and they have a sense of safety in our environment. But within the classroom, Eric talked about feedback. Feedback is really important to me. So when you remove the teacher from the front of the room and they're actually meeting one-on-one in small group, kids actually get to know their teacher as a person, not just someone that's talking at them. And the teacher actually finds something they value about every kid. They identify their strengths. They identify how they learn best. And throughout this process, when they're meeting together and when they're reviewing their submissions of proof of understanding and providing feedback and helping them grow, students feel comfortable asking questions also. And students also realize that it's okay to fail, right? It's important to practice and practice and practice. And the goal would be to reach mastery or prove. So I really think creating a culture where everyone's voice is heard and it's okay to be themselves will make such a difference.
Yeah, Nicki, it's amazing how to me, and it on one hand how when you start talking about culture, but yet how the pieces and strategies of actually making things more personal in nature, they really go hand in hand. You can't really talk about just one or the other. And as you're talking about culture, you're talking really instructional pieces there as well. So let's dive further into that. let's say I'm a teacher listening to this, and I've had a bit more of a traditional mindset. I'm kind of teaching the way that I've been taught. Primarily, a huge part of it is I'm the facilitator in the front of the room. What are some strategies, just real practical strategies that we might see in your classrooms of how we can personalize for students? What are some ways in which that might happen?
Well, first of all, there's not only one way to learn, right? So by identifying the multiple ways that your learners in your class learn is step one, and then creating choice boards or a playlist based off that, based off your students' needs. And so just being creative, being like the designer of the curriculum. So we are following the standards and we do have very high expectations, but the teachers get to pick and choose what to offer the kids. For example, they could learn with a teacher one-on-one if they feel comfortable with that. Some love to learn from video. So they want to watch a video, like I said, pause, rewind it as many times. Others love to read. So they want to read and annotate. Some of them would love to just listen to a podcast. So just giving more options for students in how to learn is a really easy way. Or providing them multiple ways to practice. Some kiddos might want in science to do an online simulation, where others wanted to actually do a hands-on lab. So just always giving 2 to 5 to 6 to 3, it doesn't matter how many choices, but letting the students feel like they have autonomy really helps. And I think that's really easy to just start with. And Eric is a master at this. So I
Yeah,
know he would
I
second
love the
that.
voice and choice pieces that you were just talking about. Eric, this is something you work with districts on, you're coaching principals on, coaching leaders on, and working directly in classrooms with in the work that you do. Talk to us about some strategies for personalization. Nikki gave us some great starting points, but what are other ways can teachers make things more personal in the classroom?
Yeah, to set up the strategies, we have to kind of frame, well, what do we really mean by personalization? Personalization is a shift from a focus on what we teach, what's in the curriculum, what's on the test, to who, our learners, to emphasize how do we support their needs. And when we look at personalization, it's not all kids doing the same thing at the same time, the same way. It's all learners getting what they need, when and where they need to learn. So when we think about strategies, let's just think about instruction. John Hattie's work, high effect size, direct instruction is still a point 0.6. You don't have to move away from direct instruction. We want to make sure that's tempered, maybe 10, 15 minutes, but using student voice during direct instruction, when we think about reviews of prior learning, checks for understanding, closure, how do we amplify voice? Getting all students involved with well-designed questions and then allowing them to respond using individual whiteboards, dry erase desks, Post-its, or technology. When we think about moving from instruction, what the teacher does, to learning, there are really some tried and true pedagogical strategies. First, station rotation or centers, not new, but we can implement those at the secondary level as well. And that's where data is used to group, regroup, target instruction, and the teacher is providing that targeted support based on student need while the rest of the students work at their own pace. Nikki talked about choice boards, playlists. You can also do must do, may do, well scaffolded tasks where students are engaging in developmentally appropriate learning activities. And while they are working at their own pace, the teacher, again, is using data to pull small groups. When I referenced rotation models, Tom, that's tier 2 when you think about RTI. Choice activities, flipped classrooms, that's tier 3. You could also do flipped lessons, not new. By the way, none of this is new. And that's sometimes such a big roadblock to change. But flipped lessons, giving kids the content outside of school, whether it's in Google Classroom, whether it's a video, then in class, teachers working with students that need the support. But most importantly, personalization honors those students who are already at standard or beyond. And that's what Nikki was referencing before. We don't want to teach to the bottom third, the middle third, or the upper third. We tend to teach to the lower third. Personalization is about meeting all those students and maximizing the time that we have with kids.
Yeah, I love that. And time's the one constant that we really can't change. So making sure that we're using those instructional moments the best that we can is imperative. Eric, you mentioned that how so much of this is just, it's not new by any means. And one of those phrases that we often use that's been around forever is this notion of differentiation, right? We've been talking it my entire career. We've been talking about differentiation. Caroline Tomlinson wrote the book, 30 years ago, one of the original differentiation books. So Eric, in this environment, as you get to see around the country, this notion of really meeting the diverse needs of a diverse set of learners, what does differentiation look like in this environment?
Yeah. And, personalization incorporates aspects of differentiated instruction, but then really leads the focus on learning. But when we look at differentiation, you can differentiate content, process, and product. More often than not, everyone in every school says they're differentiating, and they are. They are differentiating content, whether it's verbal, text, pictures, videos. The opportunities for growth are how do we differentiate process and product? When we talk about rotational models, choice boards, must do, may do, that's differentiation of process. But when we start talking about differentiation of product, that could be student voice, being able to create a manifestation of learning on Seesaw. It could be students selecting the right tool for the right task to create not the same poster board project where they're clipping out paper, where there's an arbitrary scoring guide and no real concrete way to demonstrate learning, but where students with a well-designed rubric can choose the right tool and create a product that not only aligns with mastery or extension of the standards, but really showcases not just what they learned, but to really make learning, something you believe in, Tom, personal and authentic.
Yeah. So well said there. And I love the direct strategies and ideas. And thank you for sharing those pieces. Nicki, I want to go back over to you because I know that, when we talk about these strategies, we talk about differentiation. You've also worked really hard as the principal to remove some traditional barriers to provide incredible opportunities for your students. And so sometimes we're talking, and we've been talking kind of in the weeds in the classroom from the instructional end, but sometimes it's back up more to the admin level to remove some of those traditional barriers for kids to be able to do things differently, to be able to personalize more at scale, like for their whole, student experience. And so talk to us about an example of a barrier or some barriers you've removed to provide additional opportunities for kids.
Well, one of the first things that I wanted to take a risk on is I really wanted to see if I removed points and percentages and extra credits and created proficiency skills as a guide for students to prove understanding and identify where they're at in the learning process. I wanted to see if that would work, because I just felt too many times our students are just playing the game of school, right? So I took that risk. This is not the only way, but I wanted to just test it out, right? So we started working on developing our competencies, identifying our power standards. It's been called the PCBL, it's been called mastery learning, competency-based education. It's had numerous different titles over the years, but truly in the end, we're giving state standards. It's our job to help our students master them and be prepared for the upcoming grade level, the real world, or our end of level tests, right? So we started with developing proficiency skills. We have emerging, developing, mastering, and extending. We dove really deep within the standards and identified the verbs. And then we threw in Webb's depth of knowledge as well as Bloom's taxonomy and really created a learning process for all of our standards as a guide. We focused on teacher clarity and we wanted to be really clear and transparent with our kids. We did not want to create assessments or improvements or tests that were going to surprise the kids, right? Gone are the days of trying to get them and trying to, try to trick them. We wanted to be clear and transparent so that they could have autonomy, self-assess, and they could identify where they need extra help. So we started with the skills, which meant if a student could pass with proficiency at a faster speed than, say, the original curriculum map that we've all of us as teachers have always created, the traditional curriculum map, what you do week 1, day 3, so forth, right? Remove that, just base everything off those skills. And if the kids know it, then they could actually fly. So that's why I talked about earlier. I really do have 8th graders that have completed 9th, 10th, and 11th grade math, or they've taken 2 different science classes because we've allowed them to take more of the flipped approach or take a pretest and have options to prove understanding at a faster pace. So they don't have to sit and do the same thing every day, everyone in the class. So a lot of my parents love that they have received additional high school credits during their ninth grade year at Quest Academy. So that will help open the doors when they go to high school to actually meet their needs again, based off if they want to work on university credits or go to a tech college or just intern and try to figure out what they want to do when they grow up. So just if you teach to the average, you produce average, right? So we just kind of wanted to shift things and try things, and we love it.
And Tom, real quick, I have to point something out because, I know that Nicki really is proud of this. You got to listen, everybody who's listening. Basically, they got rid of points, they got rid of grades. Her school is one of the highest achieving junior high schools in the state of Utah. And I say this because if you feel that you can't do it, there are schools like Quest and countless others that are finding their way to personalize. And not only is it stuck at Quest, Nicki is now supporting districts across the country, helping them develop proficiency scales and finding their own path to personalization.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to end on, well, before I have a couple other final questions for you, but Nicki, I want to go back to something that we started with culture, we started with the people side. And I think, some people have this notion of personalization of like, I'm going to put the kid behind a device all day. They're just going to watch a bunch of videos. I'm going to sit at my desk, and man, it couldn't be any more far from the truth. When we talk about true personalization and meeting the needs of kids, the people side, the human side, the relationship side is the foundation as important as ever. And so connect with me, if you would, with the side of the relationships, and then the whole aspect of personalization and how important relationships and the human side of this work really is.
I think it still comes back to, do your students feel safe in your classroom? And are they provided opportunities to fail, receive a reteach, receive another one-on-one, receive additional practice, and then take another attempt, right? Too many times with personalization, they think, oh, kids can take multiple tests multiple times. They can just guess and keep going. It's actually not that. We have very high expectations when you do a provision, when you switch to personalization. So you identify what your standard is for proficiency. If by chance the students do not meet it the first time, then you actually take time and meet with them one-on-one and reteach it a different way. And so that's where those relationships and connections come through. Yes, we will give you another chance, but first we're going to hang out. I'm going to give you feedback. I'm going to give you more practice problems, and then you can take a second attempt to prove mastery. At Quest, we decided, again, this is just the way that we wanted to try it. We decided that if they don't pass proficiency on their final assessment, then they can't move on to the next standard. And so our students just know that the goal is mastery, and we will provide multiple attempts to get them there. But there's no way to just kind of take the test, skate by with like a 60, 70, and skate through all year, because they know that we have really high expectations. But in order to make this work, they have to put in the time to reteach and help each kiddo and make sure
Yeah,
they feel loved.
such a great insight. Eric, do you want to touch on that relationship piece as well?
Yeah, I think I'll summarize it up. Without trust, there's no relationship. Without relationships, no real learning occurs. And I think the key to success is, do students feel that they're supported? Do they feel that any kid can learn? The one aspect of personalization, who that honors the most are students who learn differently. Ones we often classified. Nicki and I are not believers in special needs, special sped kids. No, those are kids that learn differently. And how do we support them and help them understand that they are just as smart, but in different ways? Personalization also honors the students that want to go into trades, our carpenters, plumbers, electricians, farmers. Those students are solving real world problems that are unpredictable at the highest levels of depth of knowledge. Personalization honors them because if we put everyone in a box, if we ask them to climb that same tree, some students will be able to excel, some will struggle, and that's not fair to kids. Heck, that's not fair to people, because we all have a different trajectory to learning. And that's what we want to help people understand with personalization. Not new, not more work. It's how do we do better work? How do we maximize time? How do we leverage the data that everyone has for data enhanced teaching and learning? How do we implement effective co-teaching models? Co-teaching has been around forever. That is a personalized strategy. But how do we move away from one teach, one drift to parallel teaching, alternate teaching, station teaching, one teach, one observe for feedback? So, we really want people to understand that the goal is to, again, grow our practice to support learners.
Eric, you were just saying, how do we? And you both didn't ask me to do this, but I actually want to give you both a huge shout on the how do we, because hot off the presses, I don't even have my copy yet. I've ordered it. So I don't have my copy yet. It's coming. Is your brand new book called Personalize. And so I didn't want to get off this podcast without, number one, giving you both an incredible shout. I had the opportunity to preview it, and I will tell you, folks, it is awesome. And the exact things that we're talking about here, the how-tos, it is practical, it is evidence-based, and most importantly, it is about being learner-centered and putting kids first. So I'll give you a quick moment. Share, if you would, either one of you, share just a quick blurb, a quick piece about the book and what people might find in it.
Real quick, what we try to do is, I was inspired to write this book after spending a year coaching in Nicki's school because I had my context for personalization. And what I learned is, yeah, my context was good, but it wasn't the best and it could always get better. And what we tried to do was take not only what they were doing at Quest, but all these systems across the world and present options. When you think about personalization, it's about options. It's about choices, connecting to peer-reviewed research, evidence of efficacy, but also those inspiring stories to kind of weave. How will you, grow your practice? And what I will say before I let Nicki kind of end the conversation is, as leaders, everybody, it's not about radically changing everything we're doing. The most significant changes, the ones that take hold, are the small shifts to practice that are implemented consistently and with continuity. And that's what we hope to do with this book.
Awesome. Love that. Nicki, congrats on your
Really,
first
we
book.
just we just wanted to provide hope for all the educators and leaders out there that this is possible. Again, it's just best practice. It is not anything new. It's a book that will provide multiple ways that they can start implementing this fall, right? They can read it this summer and pick a few areas that they want to test and try out. And I really want the teachers to fall in love with their job again. We want their practices to be really purposeful and meaningful. We want them to be creative. Like I said, I love how we talked about we're going to help all those kids that can't think inside that box, right? Because I kind of think all of us here are those students. We just kind of wanted to create a book that helped meet the needs of those kiddos too. They're going to be our future leaders also, right? Because they think outside of the box. So just provide teachers hope and tell them to take the risk, and then make sure all the kids are engaged and can love school again.
Well, congrats to both of you on that tremendous release. I'm going to link that down in our show notes here in the podcast. Congrats on that. I've got one final question for each of you. Eric, I'm going to have you go first. My one final question is this. As we close out our season here, as we hit the summer months, what's one piece of advice that you have, can be related to personalization or not, one piece of advice that you have for school and district leaders as they look towards this summer and into next year?
My piece of advice is twofold. You have to be honest and vulnerable if you really want to grow your practice. It's not about effective, ineffective, good, bad, but it is about knowing where we are and where we can be and where our learners need us to be. And how you do that through your own self-reflection, that is your personalized path. But honesty and vulnerability are critical because there is no perfect district, school, leader, teacher. It doesn't exist. We need to chase growth, not perfection.
Love that. Some powerful words and advice right there for sure. Nicki, over to you. Close us out. What's one piece of advice you have?
The advice would just be identify your purpose as a teacher, or your school's purpose. Figure out what your vision is. Dig deep and identify what made you go into education, and develop your why again. I know we say that all the time, but truly it's probably to see the light in your students' eyes. and just having them learn. So just shift the focus from checking the boxes to loving your students and helping them learn and grow each day, not only for academics, but for life skills and to prepare them for the future.
Awesome. Well, congrats to both of you. Thank you for the work that you're doing for our kids, not just at Quest, but across the nation, to both of you as well. On behalf of Future Ready Schools, thanks for tuning in for this season. We look forward to launching again in the fall. But for this episode, that's Nicki Slaugh and Eric Sheninger. Thanks to you both for being on this podcast.